Hello my friends, welcome to my Energy Economist channel. We're gonna start today by knowing the story behind Hubbert Peak, so stay with me. The time of harbingered catastrophes constitute a time of learning, discovery, and experimentation related to the awareness of a civilizational change. Societies were confronted with an epochal shift that represented the dislocation of the core engine of growth from reproducible and universal productive factors toward exhaustible, non-renewable, and unevenly distributed resources. With fossil fuel consumption mounting to unprecedented levels and no clear idea of the remaining stocks underground, there was a growing sense of alarm as to whether the resources might run out in the near future. Ultimately, the pessimism associated with the first forecasts sprang from a determinist conception of human action. Determinist is used here to mean that given an array of initial conditions, no alternative outcomes were feasible. For depletion viewpoints, not only did all factors push towards the same outcome, but the unintended consequences of these factors also did so. The first generation of conservationists didn't foresee that, at a certain point, consumption would begin to fall if the price of natural resources began rising. The disregard for every factor that might counteract the lemming-like rush toward depletion day set the stage for the realization of a catastrophic outlook. With economic growth, technological innovation, population growth, and social affluence all driving the increase in fossil fuel consumption, the time would be reached when the last non-renewable resource was consumed and spent. The striking point in this conception is that peak production fully coincided with depletion. Fossil fuels would cease to exist precisely when humanity was consuming the most commercial energy. It is this assumption of rising consumption trends through to depletion that is largely responsible for the dramatic teleological representation of a doomsday scenario. Central to such a view is the formalization of reserves to production ratios, calculated by dividing the estimate of proven reserves by the current level of production. The result discloses the time remaining before oil becomes completely exhausted, assuming the current level of extraction remains constant. Bluntly interpreted, reserve to production ratios become the telltale signs of an impending, unavoidable, threatening deadline. Notwithstanding the doubts and certainties that surrounded the depletion scenario, the engagement of governments, social interests, and scientists in a prolonged public debate contributed to ingraining the idea throughout societies that the valuation of the future entailed choices in the present, and the more extensive the appraisal, the more justified the change. Following the theoretical insights made by other social sciences, we make recourse to the time discount concept to assess how people ascribe a present value to the rewards to be received in the future. Somehow, time discounting quite sharply reflects the environmental stand toward conservation and how much people are willing to save or sacrifice their current benefits for the sake of a more balanced future. According to this concept, a high time discount rate means that future rewards hold only a small present value, so that a higher discount is placed on potential returns. Low discount rates mean the reverse, a higher appraisal of what is to be collected in the future. Moreover, it's assumed that people may either discount utility according to intertemporal preferences or set their own discount preferences in line with political and moral values such as intergenerational solidarity or landscape preservation. As the figure demonstrates, the environmental point of view held by conservationists is represented by a dashed line. They perceive access to natural resources as part and parcel of citizenship, and that the market should discount future profits at the same rate as society would wish to discount the welfare of future generations. As these natural resources aren't just economic goods, but the national heritage of future generations. The closer society comes to depletion day, the scarcer the asset becomes, and the higher its present value should also become. Therefore, the future rewards of present resources tend to evolve in a hyperbolic slope. The second perspective is that of political economists and is portrayed by the solid line. What distinguishes this strand of thought is its recognition that the current value of fossil fuel resources will tend to increase in line with the approaching date of exhaustion. The reason for the future escalation of prices is the degradation of costs provoked by extracting oil or coal from deeper, smaller, and thinner reservoirs. Although technological improvements could contribute to slowing this trend, their overall effect is offset by the greater costs inevitably incurred as extraction meets new and more difficult conditions. The noteworthy point behind the different valuations of the future is that all streams of thought shared the same belief towards the forthcoming time in which the last available non-renewable resource would be spent at the very peak of production. Fossil fuels were doomed to disappear precisely at the moment when they were most needed, peak mount catastrophe. It took some decades before the refutation of this thorny perspective emerged. Even nowadays, the idea that total exhaustion coincides with the moment of maximum production sometimes looms in public comments. However, in as early as 1956, an American geophysicist working at the Shell Research Laboratory made an important contribution that shattered these preconceptions. His name was King Hubbert. According to Hubbert, peak production doesn't signal the exhaustion of recoverable oil, but rather the reaching of the halfway point on the way to global exhaustion. On the historical timeline, the peak indicates that humanity has extracted half of the oil that will ever be produced. Thanks to this viewpoint, the whole debate shifted its course from how long will oil last, a question couched in reserves to production ratios, to when does the peak of oil production occur, a question grounded in the estimate of the resources still undiscovered. Henceforth, the size of the unknown offset the accuracy of that already known. The basic assumptions were disarmingly simple. In the production of any resource of fixed magnitude, the production rate must begin at zero, and then after passing through one or several maxima, it must decline again to zero. The challenge then becomes the representation of a growth curve connecting the two zeros such that the area under the curve might equal the estimate of the amount of total recoverable oil. The preference of cumulative data is the next step of fine-tuning with Hubbert, suggesting that production over time should follow a logistic curve, and thus yearly production should also follow the first derivative of the logistic, the bell-shaped curve. What began at the crossroad of intuition and mathematics ended up as a blueprint to model and forecast oil depletion. The fit of the logistic curve produced from cumulative data allowed to measure inferences from the process of growth and resources. First, the midpoint in the curve stands simultaneously for maximum production and the depletion of one half of the oil recoverable, consequently justifying the post-peak expectation of a decline in oil extraction associated with the beginning of the downward slope toward depletion. Second, the principle of symmetry over time, in which the production rate tends to increase exponentially during the first phase of development and is mirrored by the exponential decrease after the peak. Ultimately, what came to the fore and was spotlighted by the press and energy experts was the central concept of peak, along with the prediction that the US oil industry might shortly enter its downward slope. Unsurprisingly, the discovery got a very cold reception, to say the least, and was criticized both by executives and by government officials. The turnaround took place in 1970, when the US production of crude oil and natural gas liquids started to fall, confirming one of Hubbert's peak forecasts. Although the controversy didn't come to a halt, the geophysicist was at that juncture turned into a kind of conservationist folk hero and praised even by those who had previously opposed him. The oil industry had begun to side with the peak thesis, and President Carter's election in 1977 brought conservationists into the very heart of federal government. If you want to learn more about Hubbert's Peak, you could do so in my book, Economics of Petroleum Principles, which is published on Amazon. Check it out at the link in the description. Please take a second to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and do not forget to also hit the notification bell. Thank you for watching and goodbye.